Hey everyone, this week on the podcast, Sonya and I talk about how to organize your notes. Now that may seem like, a boring episode, but I promise you it's not. It's actually one of the most fundamental and important things that you can do. And if you do it right, if you find the way to separate the work that you would normally do as a journalist or as an essayist with the work you need to do as a book writer, especially a nonfiction book writer, man, how to organize your notes is like a massive time saver. And it's something that I only learned how to do the deeper I got into organizing and writing my first book. So there's a lot of things that I learned along the way. And we'll be talking about that this week. You know, as always, if you want to stay in touch with me, the best way to do it is through the newsletter, paulkicksnewsletter.com. Sonya and I have a lot to share this week about what it actually means to do the nitty-gritty work of organizing. Because when you do that nitty-gritty work, you can set yourself up to write a great book. All right, give it a listen. Season 2. Now that's a great story. The process. Last episode we talked about just sort of in general this idea of depth but not breadth.
Yes.
And but this time, Sonya,
hello.
I want us to talk about the evolution of researching notes and how to actually organize notes, because this is probably
your evolution.
My evolution, yeah.
Which was a big evolution.
Because I found this to be the most beneficial thing you can do that I did, because without this, I would just be scattered, right?
You were scattered.
So let's talk about those scattered days.
Which is also a metaphor before marriage. So
this will be fun because this actually coincides with our relationship and how we got to know each other. So I was living in Dallas. We're going to start at the beginning here.
Okay.
This is going to be a story about notes, but it's also going to be a story about our relationship.
Mm-hmm.
Our relationship. All right. So I start working at an alternative weekly in Dallas called the Dallas Observer. And Sonya is working as well as a journalist. And she's doing a freelance column for the Observer, but she's also working. Well, I don't want to speak for you. Where else are you also working at that time?
I was
Sonya?
working at a trade magazine.
Yes.
I was an editor there, but I was also writing this very small column for the Observer. And you were writing these hard-hitting, long-form stories that took up a tremendous amount of your time, because when we met, you were working on a story. And I remember very clearly that you had said you cannot come over to my apartment because I have notes all over the floor.
I did. So it was, I think it was that story about that steroid ring. There's these guys who were doing steroids in high school and at Plano.
Maybe. I can't remember.
I don't remember which one.
I remember the
you remember
enormous
the notes. So what I was doing back in the day was I was being the sort of young journalist who was influenced by the journalist who preceded him, and what they all did was they typed out their notes.
Hard-hitting. Yeah, hey, Mr. Mayor, I'm gonna put my notes out on the floor.
Excuse me, I think you're a crook, Mr. Mayor. Mm-hmm. So what those hard-hitting journalists would do is when they were done reporting, they would sort of lay out their notes everywhere, like the hand scrawled notes, of which I had notebooks and notebooks, but then also the sort of primary documents that I had. I think it was one of those more like investigative pieces that you first saw.
Yeah.
So there were tons of court orders and court proceedings, and I didn't have, I could have put these all in a file folder, but to me, I thought when I started it was more beneficial to literally have them out in front of me at all hours of the day. And so within my tiny bedroom, in my tiny apartment, was nothing but notes. And then because I had more notes, they actually ended up going into the living room, which is, I think, where you eventually saw them. And they were just notes and notes and notes everywhere. There were primary documents. There were printed out newspaper stories. There were old newspaper articles from like decades prior. There was just notebooks everywhere. And it was a mess. And Sonya, what did you think when you saw all of that?
A hot mess.
What
it was a hot mess.
Did you think, what Was there any thought about how you could both reform the note taker and the man?
I had to fix both, obviously. And I did. So kudos to me.
All right. Of course, the problem with having your notes out everywhere is you think you're organizing them, but what you're really doing is they're staring back at you and they're reminding you at all hours of the day that you're not writing or you're not looking at them. And it became something where I almost became to like resent that story or resent the subsequent stories when I was still following this, because there was literally no downtime from them. I would look all around me and see nothing but
They're
notes.
everywhere.
They were everywhere.
They were everywhere.
It was a terrible way to live.
It was terrible. And you couldn't find immediately what you needed. You
And
would
this
say,
was the
like,
other thing.
There's this one quote I need, or this one piece, and you'd have like 50 piles, and you would have to go through maybe 30 to find what you needed. It was a terrible system.
So then the next thing we did was, you in your insight said, well, if you want to have all of these physical notes, then let's go to Office Depot.
Let's organize
them. And for a while, that's what I did. Probably 2 or 3 years. I would get massive crates, and we would go. And
we would make the trek to Office Depot before you started a story, and we would buy those plastic crates and the file folders and all this stuff, so you could organize it. So instead of having papers all over the floor, we had like 3 crates that were just stuffed with papers,
which was mentally so much better.
It was an upgrade from the stuff all over the floor. It was a huge upgrade.
But I think it presented still just as many problems, right?
Yes. Because instead of taking, you an hour, maybe 2 hours to find something, it took you 45 minutes.
Yes. And also then there was the issue of like making sure that I could, quote unquote, quickly find the notes in all of these folders, which created like I had a note system for the note system. It was like a Dewey Decimal System. And I thought it was going to make things easier. And sometimes it did. But mostly, like, I remember one story, and this is when I had moved to Boston. It was a piece that took me, investigative piece, and it took me just like 6-7 months just to research it, right?
Mm-hmm.
But at the tail end of that research, I was like, okay, now I need to read through all my notes so I can organize them.
That was the other thing. You had this process where you would gather all these notes, and then at the end, right before you would write, you were like, okay, I'm now going to read everything.
Well, I think that reading everything was helpful because I needed to structure the story. And structuring the story is something we can talk about in another episode of the podcast.
Yes, but the way you do it now is it's
much better. But I don't want, hey, let's like sort of, I don't want to jump the gun. Let's stay in the moment. So I was thinking at the time, all right, I need to structure all of this. This is what I want to do. But that would take, I remember on that one story, that investigative piece in Boston, it took like 2 weeks just to read through all the notes.
Just to read your notes.
And organize them. And I just was like, I was exhausted by it. I need to take like a day off before I could actually begin the process of writing them. And even then, I was still at the point where I was like, damn it, where is this thing? Where is this one thing that I need?
Extremely unpleasant to be around.
I think that I was pleasant.
That's debatable.
So by the time I was at ESPN, and by then I was editing more than I was writing, but when I was writing, I had transitioned to something that was largely digital. What I would do was I would create these sort of email folders, and they would be organized by sub-theme, right? Like I did this one story on this guy who was a Division I coach. But he was selling meth on the side, and then he gets busted for it. And then when he comes out, he has to go and his only job he can get was a town that was decimated by the meth itself. So the whole story becomes this meditation on forgiveness and whatnot.
Was that the first time you used that system where you made all those folders?
It was not the first time, but it was the first time that I felt that I'd really benefited from that. Because what I would do is, let's say, okay, like if there's anything that's related to just his arrest, all that stuff would be dumped into there. And the beauty of creating something that was digital, at least for me, there are others who still swear by having like actual printed out copies. But the beauty of having something that's digital is each of these subfolders in my massive email folder could themselves be keyword searched.
Which was a game changer for you. It was a game changer because you had so much information.
Yes.
So much information. And the ability to search for it quickly was like I said, it was a game changer. It was a game changer. It reduced the amount of time that you spent searching for something from an hour to minutes.
And also, of course, for me, moving to largely digital was beneficial because it was like literally that cliche of out of sight, out of mind. Like when I wasn't working on the book, I wasn't thinking book. When I wasn't working on a story like that, I wasn't thinking about a story like that because I didn't have the physical manifestation of that story.
There was a shift for you to go from like, hey, Mr. Mayor, I've got the paper right here, to being like, I'm going to have this on digital.
I know. I kind of feel like I was
tough.
I kind of feel like I was betraying my roots because I was like, I was abandoning the old guy with a press card hat. Hey, I'm going to get it all down.
Exactly. Yeah. That was something that you had to move past. But once you did,
I just had to move into the 21st century.
Yeah.
How was I to be around by that point?
At what point? By the time
I was like largely.
By the time I kicked you into the 21st century?
Well, by the time I was doing a story like that, was I easier to be around in the time when I was researching?
Well, the story, it went from, by that point, we had kids, and it was not, you were writing a lot. I remember you were writing a lot at work because you just could not write at home. And then sometimes, you would bring stuff home and you would work, but it wasn't like you were it wasn't like this physical thing you were bringing home all the time. Like if you're writing at home and you had to go to the office, you were bringing these huge crates and or you're coming back. I mean, you would just grab your computer or your drive or whatever, and you would, the transition between home and work was so much more seamless. And I felt like your work got better because you had that note system. And so instead of, and I think also what I want to mention is that I felt like once you went digital and you were able to quickly access the stuff when you needed it, it stayed fresher in your mind.
Yeah.
Because oftentimes when you were researching, you would say, oh, well, this reminds me of something else. And you would go in and grab it. You would be able to quickly get it. So the information was much, much fresher in your mind. So when it came time for you to do that process where I'm going to read this, it wasn't often like you were starting over from scratch, which is what I felt like anytime you sat down with the papers or the crates. For me, it was literally like you were starting and you were reading this from the beginning with fresh eyes all over again.
Yes, and it was something that I began to seek out, this digital version of the physical world. Like I remember when I was researching that story that I ended up doing for the New Yorker, and I'm down in Lubbock, Texas, and this defense attorney that I need to speak with, he not only allows me into his office, but then gives me like the full 11-volume thing, the whole archive of everything that was related to this case. And it was just like, it was more crates than I could have ever seen. And the first thing I said to him after, thank you for letting me view this, is, can we digitize this? Because I knew by that point, like, I cannot just make copies of this stuff. And he said, actually, I now work the same way. He's like, I have them on 11 CDs if you want them. So all of those massive crates became like 11, 12, 13 different CDs that I could then access that information with, that I could then download to my computer or upload into what was then the sort of nascent cloud computing. Actually, that was probably at the point where we still had all of those Seagates, those sort of external hard drive things.
Yeah.
But even that was really helpful, just to have like a place where I knew that I could access that stuff. And again, all keyword searchable.
Which was
Huge.
Incredible.
However, when we went to the Saboteur, there was a problem that I encountered that I am trying to address now. So let's go first to the Saboteur, then we can talk about the problem. I was like, okay, to do a book like the Saboteur, I've got it down now, right? Like I'm going to type up all these notes from the books that I like, because if I just dog-eared a page of a book I like, I would never find that key information again. Like I had to transfer everything that I was reading in books and make it digital. All right, so I found a system to do that, and that system was basically, again, the email system. I would read through these books. Everything that I thought was worthwhile would go into a folder that was about that book, and then often like themed within that subfolder was like, okay, this is about the Battle of the Bulge, because Robert there's a small role in there about the Battle of the Bulge. Whatever the case may be, right? Like you organize it along sub-themes.
But there was a problem.
There was a problem. And organizing all of that, what I found was it was still way too much information.
Way too much.
I couldn't, even though I could search it, I couldn't take it in. So, because I wasn't, sometimes like, I'm not even sure which keyword search I need. I just know that generally speaking, like something is around here and I might find it in this. So what I ended up doing, and this worked for a while, was I created a sort of a digital notes of notes system where everything that I thought was useful from all of these different books went into this one master file that was a Google Doc. And that one master file ended up being like 450 pages. And which was fine, because like that was basically what I thought was like the best of the best from all the books that I knew I was going to use. And so what I would do then is just like do a keyword search once I thought that there was something about, say, a prison that I knew that Robert was in. I would search for just that term.
But what was the problem?
Well, here was the problem. Even when I was searching for all of those terms, that process of keyword searches, that would take forever. And I kept finding that in this best of best file, I had excluded so much that I ended up having to go back into the old emails to find. So, look, part of this is just about how can you do your work as efficiently as possible? And I don't think we're going to ever be able to get rid of these complications. I think there's always going to be some inefficiency, because what would be ideal is like, oh, I need this quote. I can find that quote digitally. There's that quote. I can plug it in. Or, oh, I need insight into what this one day was like. Okay, here's, and then boom, I can plug it in. All right. So this is what we're doing for the Birmingham book to try to address the problem of the one master file. I have created Google Docs upon Google Docs for every single book that I read, because those Google Docs are all searchable, every single one. So what I'm going to do is then go into Google Drive and just type in keyword searches and see all of the books that fit with that include that keyword search. And then my hope when we get to the writing, and it'll be interesting to see if this actually works, like, because we're going to follow, the podcast is going to follow this whole process. When I get to the writing, I'm hoping that that'll be so much more efficient than the master file doc. Because what the master file doc actually did was it lost me a month. I had to do what I was doing before, like where I had to read through all of those notes just to figure out what to put in the master file, and that cost me like 6 weeks. Now, I was grateful for it because I came to understand again all the material I'd read across 3 years. But it was still like, man, I feel I missed my initial manuscript deadline because I had to spend so much time just going over all of this material. I mean,
I also think, what is important, when you say you make notes, you audio, you do the voice transcribe with the notes.
Yes.
You don't actually
that's been
write
huge.
the notes.
Yeah. So I've become huge on a couple of things. If we want to get into the specifics of books, if there is a digital copy, I will get that digital copy of that book And then if it's through Kindle or if it's through Scribd, I will take that digital copy and just like highlight. In Kindle, I will highlight all the passages that I like, and then I will have a note that I like next to it. I will write it in. And then I'll transfer all of that to Evernote so that I can just see it there. Boom, that's done that way. When I do it with Scribd, it's the same sort of process, right? A Scribd book, which by the way, I love Scribd. It's a great service. It's like what, $10 a month, $12 a month? It's basically like the Netflix of books if you're not familiar with it. It doesn't have everything. And frankly, I don't want it to have everything because I would rather, as an author, that people purchase books individually. But there are certain back catalog books that are really helpful. With that, it's the same sort of process. But what you're talking about is those actual physical books that I have. And because so many of those civil rights books were never digitized, what I do is I look at the physical copy, and then I'll take out my phone and I'll open the Google Docs app, and then I'll just like literally speak. I'll say page 217, and then I'll say, what I find fascinating about it. And then as a sort of like headline, so I can, find it quickly later. But then I'll just like literally just sometimes read what I found interesting and have that be the passage that I need. Huge, huge time saver.
Yes.
I'm no longer typing up notes. It's so much more efficient. And I can find it quickly afterwards, I've found thus far. So, I mean, I am just like, I am floored by how somebody like, we talked about this guy last time in the last episode, like how Taylor Branch in the 70s and 80s and 90s, how he
I can't even imagine.
Because that's an
his poor wife. Oh my God.
That's an exhaustive history. I don't even, imagine the crates, Sonya. Imagine.
Crates.
And what if there were actually papers all over the floor?
What if
he
had
made
children,
that mistake? And I'm sure, yes.
Walking on the notes, because if a baby tried to get at your notes, it was too much.
I did not like that.
I didn't like it. So God bless that man.
And his wife.
His long-suffering wife.
Now that's a great story. The music for it comes from
Jeffrey Willett.
Some production help comes from
Jeffrey Willett.
What I want us to do is I want us to have a few episodes where we bring on other writers and we have other authors and we have them talk about like their process.
Of course.
I think we should do that.
Yeah, I definitely think we should do that.
We'll look to maybe line up some people. All right, until next week, have a good one. Hey, thanks for listening. If you like this season of Now That's a Great Story, or just getting caught up on the first, the best way to keep in touch is through the newsletter, paulkicksnewsletter.com. There, you'll get even more advice on how to be the best writer and storyteller you can be. In fact, right now, I've got a free PDF for you. The 7 rules top long-form writers follow to make more money from their stories. Sign up for the newsletter and you'll get the free PDF. Head there now, paulkicksnewsletter.com.